Thank you. Probably just. Good evening, everybody. We apologize. This is coming a night late. We ended up having technical difficulties at the church with the internet service provider, hoping to get that fixed. But we're recording now, and we'll post it. You're seeing this on Thursday evening. Before we get into what we're going to do tonight, I want to remind you that we're starting our new series. The Elements curriculum begins next week, August the 12th. It'll be going for 6 weeks, Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m., and it'll be via Zoom. We're going to post the link on our Facebook page. If you don't have a curriculum, or if you haven't signed up to get the book, please send a text or an email to my wife or to the Hope Family email address, and we will make sure that you get a book. We're really excited about this. We hope you join us, and I wanted to remind you again, that begins next Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Tonight, however, we're going to continue our interview series and take the opportunity to learn a little bit more about our pastor. So, Brother Gossett, thank you again for kind of being willing to talk through just your life and stuff with us. We appreciate it.
Sure, absolutely. Looking forward to it.
And so let's just jump straight into it. Tonight, I wanted to ask you about kind of your testimony.
Sure.
How did your Christian journey start? How did you get to be the man, the pastor we have today?
Yeah. What train wreck caused this? I was not raised in church, but I was raised very close to church. My grandmother, who lived immediately next door, if you've been around me much, you've probably heard me talk about my grandmother, Koki. And I'm not real sure why we called her Koki. That's what everybody called her. Her real name was Emma, which was a lot prettier name than Koki, but Koki was what it was. And Koki Sister Koki went to the church there in Diboll all of my life. She was one of the very first members of that church. I believe she was a member of that church for close to 65, 70 years. And so I may be a little off on that, but I'm pretty close. And she was there at the founding, her mother, and so she had quite a testimony. But that was my spiritual beacon in many, many ways. And so as a child, when I didn't realize that you could tell grandmothers no. She would ask me and take me to church, and I really enjoyed church as a child. There were some folks in that congregation that I still think back as a child that loved me and put up with me and my nonsense, and just was very, very grateful for them. And I'm going to miss a few when I start going through the list. So if I don't say, it's probably your parents' names if it's anybody that's from Diboll that's listening. But Sister White, she was one of my Sunday school teachers, and Sister White always wore. She had a certain powder that she wore, and
one of those scents that
yes,
can still.
And I can remember that one of the things I look forward to is she would hug me every time I came, and this powder smell would just envelop me, and it became very associated with just comfort and peace in my mind. But it was her loving me, teaching me in Sunday school. There was a gentleman by the name of Brother Horton that was one of our music leaders, and he was just always so kind, loved me, paid attention to me. And then Brother Brian Ward was my Sunday school teacher when I was a little bit older. Those were all just folks that just really impacted my life. Sister Ward, her Jill Patterson has been here. It was her mom. And anyway, those were spiritual influences in my life there at that church, and they just put up with me and loved me and tried to give me a little bit of sense. But when I got a little bit older, when I got close to high school, I got big enough to say, no, I'm not going to go. And for many years, I didn't go. I didn't go to church. I had received the Holy Ghost as a child, but I got interested in being a high schooler and doing all the things that high schoolers do, and went through a period of time there. Always loved the people of the church, just didn't go. And I can still remember my grandmother every morning, every Sunday morning, about 9 o'clock, my phone would ring every Sunday morning. And it would be my grandmother. I had a phone in my room. I don't know why I had a phone in my room back in the, early 80s. I was a teenager, but I did. And my grandmother would call, and it was always the same question. Hey, are you going to go to church with me today? Just like I hadn't told her no for 5 or 6 years of Sundays in a row. And she would ask me, and I'd say, no, Grandma, I don't think I'm going to make it today. And she'd say, okay, well, I love you, and, I'd sure love to have you come. Well, maybe next week. And she'd call me next week, every Sunday. And it was about a period of about 6 years I didn't go to church. And my grandmother invited me to every revival. She invited me. I knew everybody that got the Holy Ghost. I knew everybody that got baptized. I knew every evangelist that came through. She made sure I knew every one of those things. And the night I prayed back through to the Holy Ghost, I can't make this stuff up. She had invited me to a business meeting. And for whatever reason, the reason was both of my grandfathers, who I was very, very close to, both of them had gotten very sick, wound up in 2 different hospitals there in Lufkin. I was very attached to both of them. I felt like my whole world was coming to an end, and I realized I needed to go to church. And so I was talking to my grandma, and I said, I'm going to go back to church with you. She said, well, let's go tonight. We got a special meeting tonight. She didn't tell me it was a business meeting. I was sitting on the second row of the church, just in shambles, my world falling apart, and Brother Elzine Strong. Any of you that ever met Elzine Strong, you never forgot him. And little bitty guy, he was 5 foot nothing, and he looked out and he saw me sitting there with my long hair, and I think I had at least put blue jeans on. I'm pretty sure I had just a raggedy T-shirt on because that's what I wore all the time. And I was sitting there in the second row, prepared to vote, or what, I don't even know what thought I was gonna do, but I'm sitting there, and he looks out and sees me, and he says, hey guys, it looks like Andy needs some help tonight. And I've got all our stuff for the business meeting, but listen, we did okay. Here's how much money we took in. Here's how much money we put out. Is everybody good with that? Yep. Okay, vote. Let's pray for Andy. And I prayed through the Holy Ghost that night right there in what was supposed to be a business meeting. And that was where my life changed. I was a sophomore in college at that time, so I was about 20 years old. Rededicated my life to the Lord. Just started going to church. It wasn't long. I was at TBC and just felt God calling me to preach. In fact, I had talked to Brother Strong before I went back to church. And I had felt a call to preach. God woke me up in the middle of the night. Now, I hadn't been to church in 6 years. And God woke me up in the middle of the night. I felt this call to preach. I called Brother Strong. I told him what was going on in my life. And I didn't know what he was going to say. I just told him, I feel like God, wants me to preach and everything. And he said, his small, quiet voice, he said, well, don't you think maybe you ought to come back to church first? I said, well, that'd probably be a good idea. So that was kind of where the genesis of all that started, and my grandfathers and all of that. So, and went to TBC after that. And before we got out of there, I got married while I was there, and the Lord called us to go to New York. We spent some time in New York after TBC, and we had a couple different stints in New York. And but that was really, that life-changing moment was right there.
So that was really the turning point right there.
Yeah.
Was in that season, in that business meeting that turned into a prayer meeting just for Andy.
Yes. And a pastor that was sensitive enough not to follow an agenda and followed after the Lord, and prayed me through the Holy Ghost. I am eternally grateful that they didn't just go ahead and have that business meeting. So.
And miss that opportunity.
Yeah.
Well, you said that God had called you before you even came back, and then you have this turning point, this place where God meets you again, and you rededicate your life. You said you were a sophomore in college. What does that look like? I mean, I know we we feel callings, but were you sold on it immediately, or did God have to poke you a little bit and convince you? Or
That's the interesting thing. I really was. When the Lord spoke to me, when He woke me up, He scared me to death. I mean, literally, you know, y'all can think what you want, but literally, I felt like He kind of drug me over the fires of hell and let me see what that was like. And my life was in a mess. I was doing way too many. I was doing a lot of things I shouldn't do. I was drinking things, taking things, smoking things that none of them were good. Like I said, my hair. It's hard to imagine now, but my hair was long and red and curly, and it hung down on my shoulders. But immediately, I just when this whole thing happened, I just felt like this is what I was supposed to do, and it felt like the weight of the world had come off my shoulders. My mom and dad.
so it was a relief when you.
It was, yeah. I maybe that's what I'd been running from. I really don't know. It was just like the whole weight of the world, and it felt like, okay, this is right, you know. And I prayed through it in January 28th. I'd have to think hard on the year, but it was January. That August, I want to say it was 1985, but that August, I was at TBC. It was that quick of a transition there, and so.
So Brother Strong wasn't kidding when he said, "Well, why don't we get you to come back?" And it's like, "Oh, well, you came back. Let's send you to Bible."
He did.
Bible
he
college.
sent me to Bible college, and I for those of you that are familiar with Apostolic Lighthouse, I was like the second greenest guy on the whole place. I didn't really know much of what was going on, but I found the one guy that knew less about what was happening than I did, and that was Brother Donnie Husledge. And so he became my friend, and I learned what I was supposed to do by trying to figure out what he was supposed to do. And so that's where our relationship started. I've literally known Brother Husledge longer than I've known anybody in either one of the of Apostolic Lighthouse or this church, and I think he can say the same. I think our relationship predates our wives. It predates everybody else. I met him in August of 1985, I believe, is the year. So,
Speaking of your wives, you know, some of y'all may not know the history. Texas Bible College has often been called Texas Bridal College because it does seem very common for young men and women to go to study the Word of God and find each other and find common purpose and then decide. But you didn't actually find your wife at TBC. I mean, it was related, if I understand correctly. But tell us a little bit about that story.
All right. So it's a very funny story. So at TBC, the food left a little bit to be desired. They tried hard, but I'm sure their budget was limited, and they cooked like chicken in just about every imaginable way that you could possibly cook chicken. And so I can remember we had this little chant we used to sing. You know, we've had chicken baked and we've had chicken fried. There's pretty much not any way of kind of chicken that we haven't tried. We've had chicken tender and we've had chicken tough, but oh Lord, don't you think we've had it enough? That was our motto. And so I was scheduled to go. We called them crusades, but it was preaching events. It was my freshman year. We were going to go to Beeville, Texas, and John Harris, who pastors a large church in Arlington, Pastor John Harris. Those of you that are associated with New Life, Brother Hall, that's John Harris's father-in-law. He married Melissa, and so anyway, Brother Harris, he and I were sitting and we were eating whatever it was that we were eating. I'm not even sure what it was, but it wasn't very good. And he said, we're going on that crusade to Beeville. And I said, yeah. And he said, there's another crusade that goes to St. Martinville, Louisiana. And I said, yeah. And he said, you know what? I hear the food is really good in Louisiana. And I said, I'm in, buddy. Let's change. So we went and talked to whoever we had to talk to, and they agreed to let's go to St. Martinville, Louisiana. instead of Beeville, Texas. And so when we went into the service that night, before service, it was on a Thursday night. I think we were there Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, I believe. But it was the first night. Yeah, it was Thursday night. I was one of the newer preachers, so I had to preach first on Thursday night. And then that was kind of my duty. I couldn't sing.
Done.
I was done. I was just there to hang out and have a good time for the rest of the time and eat whatever Sister Hammer would cook for us, which was a lot, and she would do it at any time. That was the house we were staying at. But anyway, right before service, this young lady comes running through with curlers on her hair, and she's petrified, and she runs into the ladies' restroom because all these guys from TBC, she has curlers in her hair, and that was Sister Gossett. That was the very first time I ever met her. So I preached that night. It was two preachers. I preached first, and then the second preacher preached, and then he gave the altar call, and so. When she came up to be prayed for, she came to the altar, and it was a youth kind of service, and she came to the altar, and I went over and prayed for her. I laid my hands on her and prayed for her. Didn't smash her poof. She still remembers that. I made sure I put my hand in a way.
Well, you saw the work that went into it.
If you all see all the poofs, I don't know why I'm doing that on my head because I couldn't poof anything. So, but
at one point,
at one point, and so anyway, I prayed for her, and. When I was praying for her, the Lord spoke to me and just said, just tell her whatever the Lord told you to do, you need to do it. That was it. I didn't think anything about it other than that, oh, that's kind of cool. I'll just tell her that. So after service, things had kind of settled down. We were all talking and just standing around. I said, hey, I need to tell you something. Just met her. Just met her. I said, I need to tell you something. She said, well, what's that? And I said, whatever the Lord told you to do, you need to do it. And she immediately went white as a sheet, and she said, did he tell you what he told me to do? No, he just said that. Are you sure? No. And so long story short, the Lord had told her to marry me. That's what the Lord had said. And so she asked the Lord.
She's wanting to know for sure.
Yeah. She asked the Lord for 3 signs. So that was sign number 1. Sign number 2 was on a Saturday morning. Brother Paul Records, who was notorious, he was a pastor of the church, notorious matchmaker. Brother Paul Records, we were going to go do door knocking there in St. Martinville. And so I was paired up with her. And honestly, still to this point, she was driving the car that we were all riding in, and I thought she was like 15. And I'm like 20 years old, and I thought she was like 15. And finally, I realized, oh, no, she's 18 years old. Okay, well, maybe we got something here, And I was very attracted to her. She's a beautiful young lady. And so they dropped us off to do door knocking, and when we got out of the car and they drove away, took the car. They were going to take the kids to go somewhere else. The other kids to the next street over. When we started walking down the street, I suddenly realized that it was about a 400-yard street, and there was one house on the very, very end. So he had purposely put it there so that we would have to talk. So she realized in her mind that was sign number 2. And then her baby brother, Chris Broussard, who is a children's evangelist, and I love you, Chris, but basically a pain in the neck most of the time. And Chris, after service on Sunday night, we were all standing out there. He was several years, I think 6 or 7 years younger than her. So she's 18. He's maybe 5 years, 11, 12, 13, something like that. But he's young enough to not have any sense and just a little rash. And so he runs up to me out of nowhere and says to me, my sister said she's going to marry you. And, of course, Lisa was embarrassed and shamed and everything, but I did manage to get her address out of her. We began to correspond, wound up going to Christmas banquets together, and The rest was history. It wasn't long before we were engaged, and by August of the next year, so I met her in like October. Teenagers yell, "Close your ears." I met her like in October, and on August 15th of 1986, her and I were married, and so she stayed with me through. I was still in Bible college. She helped support me and get me through Bible college. And we got through there, and then after I graduated, we moved to New York. So started our.
So y'all went directly into ministry after graduating Bible
We
college
did.
up into New York.
Yeah. There's a district board that still should be held accountable for that. So we really had no business trying to start a church, but I really felt like it was. Honestly, it was. There's a church there in Oswego today. And I've had the chance to go back there and preach. There's not a direct connection, but the pastor has been so kind, Brother Alan Gossett, and he said that when he went to Oswego, it was a couple, 3 years after we had left. When he had went to Oswego, he said people just came in droves. He said we grew very fast, and he said, I asked the Lord, what happened? Why are we growing so fast? And Brother Gossett was kind, and he said the Lord spoke to him and said it was because of the prayers the Gossetts prayed while they were in this city. And the Lord had already dealt with me. I was very convinced that the Lord didn't have us there for the city. That was a place where he needed to go and work on us a little bit. So he taught us some valuable lessons. And Jessica was born when we were at TBC, before we left TBC. So we were, a young family with a baby girl. We had one car. I worked 30 miles away, so she was stuck at home. And if you've ever been to Oswego, New York, it's a beautiful place, and it snows forever. And so she was stuck in the house. How she didn't go stir crazy to this day, I don't really know. And then while we were there, our son Sam was born while we were there before we left, and so he's a New Yorker by birth, and so is Landon, but that was on a second journey.
I was about to ask. I know there's a number of there's a good portion of your history that's up in New York.
Yeah.
I think we're getting close to running out of time, though, so we may have to save some of those details for maybe a future point when we can talk about it.
So.
I wanted to bring things a little bit closer to now.
Sure.
I think most of us have at least a passing knowledge of the history of Hope.
Uh-huh.
But can you maybe give us at least the synopsis
Sure.
again? What brought you back to Georgetown, and specifically, why Hope?
Yeah. So we had moved back after our second stint in New York. We were in New York 3 years one time, and the second time we were 10 years. We assisted for 5 years. We pastored for 5 years, so at the same church. And then the Lord spoke to us. We moved back. We wound up back in Lufkin, Texas. At this time, we were at Brother David Hunt's church at Eastview there in Lufkin. Real good man of God. And it was a large church, and I was head of the Christian school there. I was the principal of the school. I served as but our real ministry, the ministry we found the most fulfilling, was the Young Marrieds ministry there. We started the Young Marrieds ministry. And while I was in the middle of all of that, I still had this itch that I wanted to start a church again. The Lord had that bug had really never quite left me. And I told you I'd met Brother Donnie Husledge while we were at Bible college. Well, when we went to New York, he went to Alaska, and so our years, we separated. He was one of my very best friends, and I don't even remember how we came back in contact with each other. But one day, he was pastoring now here in Georgetown at Apostolic Lighthouse, and I got in contact with him. We were talking on the phone, and I'll still remember it. It was like one of those crystal clear moments. He said, "What do you, Andy? I know that being Young Marrieds Director is fun and all that stuff, but I know you too well. What do you want to do what do you want to do next?" And at that moment, I knew. I just knew. I said, I want to plant a church. That's what I want to do. I want to plant a church again. And I said, I still have that itch. I want to do that. And I said, I feel like I've learned a lot. And he immediately said, "You need to come see me." And so we made it a date to come out here and to visit with them here in Georgetown, and fell in love with the place and just felt God calling us. And he had already moved out to Andice by this time, but he was still being a little bit protective of Georgetown. Like that was kind of like, So he kept directing me to, hey, you ought to look at Liberty Hill. And I'd look, no, but I like Georgetown, but you ought to look at this one or that one. No, but that's great. They're beautiful, but I like Georgetown. Finally, he said, okay, we're going to support you. And he was talking with a friend of his, a guy by the name of Ben Daniel. And Ben Daniel was selling a building over on Industrial Loop. And he had put it up. It was commercially zoned, but he had been using it as a church. Ben Daniel's a great man. He had been using it as a church, but he was getting ready to close it down. And he was talking to Brother Husledge. And when he realized what Brother Husledge started asking him about buying the church, and without disclosing the financial terms, he provided. It became just obvious that he said he felt like God said, "Look, you need to help him get this church." So he gave it to Brother Husledge at a very, very low rate. We wound up with a very nice building that we planted the church in over on Industrial Circle, 40201 Industrial Circle Drive, Georgetown, Texas, and that's where we started. And then the church grew. We were outgrowing it. This church, which was the original home of Apostolic Lighthouse many, many years ago, or at least a home. It may not have been the original home, but it was a home for many, many years. This church became available through a series of events, and we wound up moving into this church. And we basically transformed it. Umberto Carbajal was so instrumental. Those of you know that Umberto, he really took that burden on and just really helped to transform this building. There was a lot of people that helped, but it was really him that led and drove that and made it happen. And and we wound up in this building from that. So why Georgetown? Brother Husledge, I guess, is the kind of the reason for that. And if you could have seen us back in 1985 walking into TBC that August, the idea that either one of us would be pastoring anything or doing anything meaningful with our life, you would have said, nah, I don't know about all that. So, but that was when we wound up here. God it was a series of financial miracles that made it happen. We can get into that another time, but just felt that this is where we're supposed to be, and still do. This is where we're supposed to be. So,
Well, we're getting close to our time tonight, but I wanted to briefly touch on another topic, and I think with the time we have, we may not be able to really dig into it too much, but one thing that I know you and I have discussed in the past is that you've felt a calling to be bivocational as an intentional plan of how God's used you in your ministry.
Yes.
Can you kind of tell us a little bit about that and what the thinking is and the calling is?
I can. Paul was a tent maker. That was kind of the thing there. One of the things. I stay busy, so it's hard for me to not be real busy. And I'm not saying that full-time pastors aren't busy. They are. That's not the point. But for me, I never really felt like I wanted to go and pastor a large church or a church that could necessarily support me financially, but I knew I wanted to plant a church, and I wanted to leave something for the next generation. And one of the ways I felt like I could most effectively do that is not be a financial burden to the church, but be a financial blessing to the church. And so the Lord's always, he's been very good to me. We've been able, we've never taken a salary. I'm not saying we won't ever, and the next person that comes, when there will be a next person, they probably should. But it's allowed us, to be in a space financially where we've never really had to struggle financially. We've had other great supporters through the years that have really supported us as well. If you've been around, Brother and Sister Pierce, Jessica, she's a nurse. Just a host of people, but they were with us at the very beginning. We've had others again, just throughout the year. but we've never been, we've never had to be a drain on the finances of the church, and or a strain on the church, and so it's allowed us to stay, very financially safe and healthy. We've never had to do like fundraisers and stuff, and so for me, I feel like in this day and age, that the idea of a person going into a city and being able to just have a living wage and planning a church, and somehow or another that gets a second. It's like a second tier. Like you're not quite as good. You have to work. But I've chosen to do it. We could not work, but we've chosen to do it, and we feel like it's a model that others could emulate to get churches planted. We need to get, there's churches that need to be planted all over the place. There's no way to support them all financially, but they can support themselves. And Brother Donnie Husledge and the church there, they helped us tremendously right at the beginning, to be able to do that. The daughter church, daughter work concepts work. That's something your dad was very instrumental in here in Austin, in the greater Austin area. That works, but we're willing to sacrifice, and I would rather do that than put a strain on the church financially. And
I know because I'm in a bit of the same boat as a minister in that I've always had a secular career, and I know I found it quite challenging to because the key thing about work is that if you do a good job, they just give you more of it. So, and that seems to be the case in both a secular career and in ministry itself. Your success just engenders more opportunities to then throw yourself back into it. So how do you balance the two when you've got opportunity in a secular sense, but also, a church that you're trying to get off the ground and grow?
Well, I'm not sure I do balance it all the time. If you've ever watched anybody riding a bicycle, Brother Pugh from West Texas, I heard him talking about this one time, and it's always stuck with me. He said, when we talk about balance, he said, riding a bicycle is a perfect sense of balance, but if you watch somebody on a bicycle, they're not straight up and down all the time. Sometimes they're leaned over here, sometimes they're leaned over there, but they don't fall off. The balancing act is that they don't fall off, and that's the way I feel. Sometimes, my secular job, it pulls me over to this side, and then other times I'm maybe more over here. But the trick is to not fall off and try to find that balance somewhere in between. It's not always easy. Frankly, it's not. Sometimes secular work's more demanding than others. And then sometimes church work is more demanding than others. And so, we probably haven't gotten it right all the time, but it's always been done with and you don't sleep a lot. That's the other part. You just don't sleep a lot. So if you require 8 hours of sleep, you might want to think about this.
Different path maybe than this one. Well, and the last question I wanted to ask you tonight, because I think we're right at our time. There's many more questions I wanted to ask you, but the last one we'll do tonight in the same vein. Because, I've grown up in a minister's home, and my father was bivocational for the majority of his career, but then eventually the church grew to a point where it was his primary support. And I've noticed, we're just noticing, different ministers as I've grown. One of the key things for a successful pastor especially is to stay connected to his congregation and what's going on in their lives and not get so removed from what happens to normal people that he's unable to effectively minister to them. And I know that especially full-time ministers, that's something they have to actively work at. Kind of with that as a context, do you think that being bivocational and being day-to-day in a career has changed the way you lead or preach or teach?
I hope it has. I believe it has. With being bivocational, I understand, Wednesday night, you're seeing this on Thursday night. We're here on Wednesday night. I understand sometimes you're just tired. I get that. It's you're halfway through the work week and you're worn out. And maybe you come to church and maybe you're not quite as energetic as normal. And I get the preciousness of that. One of the things I've tried to be very intentional about is understanding that evenings and weekends are precious to people that work, 45, 50 hours a week, which is what most people work. And, so I don't schedule events just to schedule events. I want them to have meaning. I want them to have purpose. And so, we'll do a vacation Bible school, once a year in non-pandemic coronavirus 19 years. We'll do vacation Bible schools and those kind of things, but that's 1 week, and I recognize the sacrifice that's made. For many years, we did a July the 4th fundraiser. I don't know if it's a fundraiser. It was a fund spender that we all got to hang out together, but we made cotton candy, but a lot of folks got to know this church to this day. And it's interesting that now this building is just down the street from where we spent all the time doing on those 4th of Julys. And we literally would have people come every year to talk to us. We've kept our logo the same, the Hope Family, the sideways H. We've kept that the same the whole time. And Lisa and I, we've done a lot of garage selling over the years, and to this day, we can have on a T-shirt, and we'll have people ask us, "Do y'all used to sell cotton candy?" Or they'll ask us, "Are y'all the people at the church there right as you're going into the park?" Because they see our sign, and they remember us. And so, it's kind of divine in that way, but the greater point to your question is, we try not to do unnecessary things. Like, if we're going to ask you to be here on a Friday night, we want it to be something worth being here for. If we take your week, we want it to be, we want it to be quality and worth, because the families are valuable and your time off is valuable. I've always been very resistant to working on Saturdays because Sunday is in many ways a work day for me. So Saturdays is like my day, to be off. And,
Right.
And so I don't schedule a lot of events on Saturday because I know other people are very much the same way. If you're devoted to the church, you're here on Sunday. So Saturday's your day, and if I take that away from you frivolously or unnecessarily, people, they may not say anything, but eventually I feel like they come to resent it a little bit. And I certainly think their children come to resent it a little bit. So I think it's made me better that way. And I think it's helped me, I understand being tired.
Yes.
I'm not saying a pastor that doesn't, they're tired. I'm not denigrating
There's plenty of ways to get tired.
Yeah, there's plenty of ways to get tired.
Well,
but I know that there's if you're working in an office setting or, out on a job, you sometimes it's a win just to show up. You don't have to do anything once you get there, but I got here and I made it through the door, and I've dragged myself in. And I think as ministers, sometimes we need to always remember that the time of the people that come to our churches is valuable time. And I think working helps me to keep that in perspective.
Well, we're a little over our time, but so many other questions I want to ask. I'd love to follow up and ask more about your time as a principal. That seems like it's got a lot of interesting stories in it.
It does have a few stories. Landon was in my class in my school, so there's plenty of stories.
Now I want to ask even more. But we'll have to save that for another time. Thank you so much for making the time and opening up to us tonight.
Absolutely. God bless.
Don't forget our Elements curriculum starts next week. We hope to see you there. And again, apologize for being a day late on this. We love you guys, and we hope to see you Sunday.
Bye-bye.